Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese. We have a special post-draft episode for you here with Tyler Forness of AtoZ Sports and Vikings First and School. That's is it a podcast channel in general, and you have like kind of different shows that you do, or I kind of forget exactly what the structure is.
So it is technically a podcast channel, podcast network kind of thing, but it's pretty much the real Forno show, and then Dave's two old bloggers, and then we have Sal Spice, who does like more of like an entertainment style show. So we kind of hit all the different minutiae of Vikings fandom, and since the Climbing the Pocket split, it's been a really cool journey to kind of see how it's grown.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know you've put a ton of work into the Forno show for a long time, and it's just been great to see that. Plus AtoZ Sports. I mean, the sports journalism world is not a world that I like sink my teeth into, and you've gone kind of full throated into it, and it's cool to see because it's not an easy world to crack into either.
No, I to kind of peel back the curtain, I did about a year and a half, 2 years of like 80, 90-hour weeks just to get to a point where I could potentially do this full time. And then I've been able to stick in it full time for 3 years, even though I'm now kind of on like my third gig, I guess you could say. But
Sure.
AtoZ is like, it's not 1099, it's a W-2 job. And it's a really cool growing company that's got a lot of like, they don't tell us like, hey, do a bunch of clickbaity stuff. We want to take good stuff and then spin it right with a headline, and then take that and try and generate a ton of views. So they like that we write good stuff, and I think that's really cool. It's something you don't get a lot of places.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that about Tom at Zone Coverage as well, right? Because I write once a week, and it's like I'm not trying to do like the full-time sports writing thing, right? So it's different for me, but them just basically greenlighting any idea that I have to write and kind of not pushing anything from like a clickbait perspective or something like that. Like obviously if something's going to get views, like we might make a decision to go that way, right? But like it's really not a ton of pressure there, and I like that quite a bit. So that's awesome to hear for you. But let's dive into this 2025. Yeah, it's 2025, right? The 2025 NFL draft for the Minnesota Vikings. We have 5 picks to discuss here today. We also have the addition of Sam Howell that we'll talk about. But kind of what I wanted to hit on the top before we get into the player with Donovan Jackson is kind of the Vikings' decision there, right? I think pre-draft, there was a lot of discussion, including myself on this show, and I think everywhere you look, that it would really make sense for the Vikings to trade down because they only have 4 picks in this draft, right? Now, they did trade down with the 3rd round pick, so they collected a little bit of extra capital, obviously got to 5 total picks in the draft, but their first round pick was where they were going to really pick up real value or real extra value in terms of getting multiple players in the draft, and they chose not to do it. And I think that choice, it's very clear that they made a choice, right? Because obviously the 2 teams right after them traded back. With the Giants trading up for Jackson Dart, they gave the Texans 2 extra thirds, and it was a compensatory third, right? I think. And then also next year's third. And then the Falcons obviously made a more major move with the Los Angeles Rams, where they traded a next year's first. The Rams did have to give their compensatory third back to the Falcons, and they also moved back to 46 instead of 34 with the Giants, right? So it's a much bigger move back, much more difficult. I did see some people commenting like the Falcons didn't even call the Vikings, right? And kind of offer that sort of move. For me, like, obviously I can't know either way what was offered or what wasn't, right? But also, if you're the Vikings, and it's a little bit more difficult because Raheem Morris, like, obviously has a Rams relationship. Guess what? Kevin O'Connell has a Rams relationship as well. I'm sorry, but it's the Falcons, so never mind. But Kevin O'Connell potentially has a relationship with Raheem Morris, even if it's not as strong as the one Morris has with like Les Snead and Sean McVay and things like that, right? So like, there's a little bit of working personality where I think the Vikings should have been able to put themselves in a position to pull off that trade, right? So like, sorry, that was me hedging a lot on potentially quibbling about the trade, but in your eyes, would you have preferred to take either of those trades, or you're fine with sticking and picking Donovan Jackson?
I was really annoyed at first that they didn't take one of those trades, but once you hear Kwesi and Kevin talk about how much they love Donovan Jackson, I kind of came around where I'm just like, you know what? I'm just okay with it because when you if they're that confident and they have that kind of belief in the player and they had a strategy and they knew, because basically when you kind of see how that draft went along, you had 3 O-linemen in the top 10 and Jackson he wasn't getting past 25 that we found out pretty
Yeah.
quickly from like Lance Zierlein, other Texans people. So the fact that he wasn't getting anywhere close, I think the Vikings knew that. And they knew they just could not go back any farther to be able to get the guy and the position that they really wanted to fortify. I would argue that I would have taken a completely different direction instead of solidifying left guard, because I think you can do that in so many other ways. But this offseason has kind of been like the Chiefs in 2021, where after the Bucs just whipped them in the Super Bowl, they just decided, all right, we're going to pour everything into the O-line. And you know what? They fixed it. Now, tackles are still a problem, but that's not because of what happened in 21. It's just because, that you had guys get older. Jawan Taylor turned back into being bad, and now you have a longer standing issue. But the fact that the Vikings poured all that in there, I get it. I would have taken the Giants trade before the Falcons trade because I think the guy you're getting at 34 is a pretty dang good football player, and you had so many options available to you. There was only, I believe, 2 defensive backs between where the Vikings picked at 24 and then where they would have picked at 34 with a trade down with the Giants. And it would have been Malachi Starks and Maxwell Harrison both came off the board.
Mm-hmm.
You could have done so much at that spot. Iman Wari, who was far and away the number 1 pick on my mock draft tracker. You could have gone wide receiver with like a Luther Burden who was still there. There were options for you, good options. Options talent-wise that were equivalent to what Donovan Jackson was. And when you look at like the trade value charts, like the Falcons actually got a pretty decent value to make that trade. They didn't give up nearly as much when you look at the trade value charts as you would have thought. The only one that they lost on was the Jimmy Johnson. They didn't lose on the other ones. Which is kind of crazy.
So I had a skeet about this, and I don't. So there's the website that everybody uses for trade charts. I developed my own trade chart calculator because I didn't really agree with how that chart devalues future picks. So my chart, and I skeeted it, I guess, right on BlueSky. My chart has it being good value for the Rams for both the forecasters, right, which I split out from the like analytics people. So like the Jimmy Johnson chart and then the Anthony Reinhardt chart, which is like new this year, and the Rich Hill chart. The Anthony Reinhardt chart, it was a loss on, but the other ones I had it as good value on. And it kind of came out to overall as good value. And even the analytics charts has good value, but I value future picks more highly in that trade chart. So that's kind of the difference there. The other difference is why the evaluators don't like it compared to the Giants trade, especially, or the analytics people. Sorry, I'm talking in a Reefs consensus board terms instead of the trade charts, right? The analytics people don't like it because you don't get as many picks, right? The Giants trade back, you're getting 2 extra picks, where they always prefer getting more and more draft capital. The other trade back, you're more even, right? And they undervalue first round picks to what the trade reality is on the analytics charts. So you're just going to get less value from a future first on an analytics chart than you are from the Jimmy Johnson and the Rich Hill chart.
Yeah.
But
so I do find that interesting when you talk about how you value picks more in the future, which personally I agree with. But one of the reasons why Joseph Hefner he made the trade calculator that you're talking about that everybody uses, it's more of a historical how like NFL teams have valued those future picks based on like trades and stuff. It's like the bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush kind of thing. Like that old mantra where like a first round next year is worth about a second this year because, that second is right now. I know what that asset's going to be. There's not that kind of variance where I don't know exactly what kind of class and what player is going to be there, but I know who's going to be here at this spot right now. So
Yeah, and
I think there's merit to both sides.
yeah,
I personally and I think we can get into a deeper conversation about Kwesi because he talked about in his pre-draft press conference, he built his own trade chart. Well, when you build your own trade chart, you can perceive it as a good value for you. But if you're getting low value on the market, how much does that really matter? Because you could be getting a bigger return. And I think when we're having the conversation about future picks, that in itself is the same kind of conundrum because how much value are you getting really when you could potentially be getting more when you're looking at things in a different way? And I think it's a much bigger discussion than we have time for tonight,
yeah.
but I find it very fascinating.
Yeah, and so I wrote an article about this over on Zone Coverage, but there's a couple things I want to unpack here, right? First of all, I don't think the Falcons' first round pick next year is going to be like in the late 20s, right? So that to me personally adds a little bit of value to that Falcons first round pick, right? Like I think they're going to be a team that's picking in the teens, which usually when you're trading a future first round pick, like you think you're going to be good. And I'm confident the Falcons think they're going to be good, right? I just don't agree with them. Um, but then secondarily, like you talked about, the trade value thing is pretty interesting. And I think it's been where I've probably been most critical of Kwesi as a GM. You know, if you go back to 2022, we got bad value compared to like the Jimmy Johnson charts and like the traditional stuff for trading down just because he was willing to take a loss in that area, right? And it's been kind of interesting that he's not really been willing to take a win since then because of, and you talked about this a little bit, their confidence in their evaluations of the players that they're going to get, right? They were willing to trade up for Dallas Turner because they were so confident in his ability. And I think that can be generally an okay strategy, right? Like I'd rather have a guy that hits big. I'd rather have a Jordan Addison than two late second round picks, right? One of whom's probably going to be useless and the other one might turn into a quality starter, but Addison's going to be a significantly better player than that, right? Than what you get in the combination of the two. It just comes into your confidence in your own evaluation can be overconfidence in some cases,
Yeah.
right? And that's where I thought Kwesi's analogy post-draft kind of missed the mark a little bit because he was talking about what he really wants to do is hit the ball back into to the fairway after hitting into the rough, right? Rather than going for the green in one shot, right? And really, if you're sticking and picking, that's more like going for the green in one shot than trading back, right? And giving yourself a couple more bites at the apple. Now, you know, at least the way it's viewed analytically, right? But I also understand that there are things like talent cliffs in the draft. And I do think there was a talent cliff at guard beneath Donovan Jackson, right? Like, I don't think Jonah Savaiinaea was the same level of prospect that Jackson was, right? I don't think Tate Ratledge was the same level of prospect that Jackson was. So I understand if you're focused on interior offensive line, going that way. I wasn't focused on an interior offensive line pre-draft, so I would have been more comfortable trading back for like a corner or something, and you could have still gotten the corners I liked in Will Johnson and Savone Revel at 46, even if you traded back with the Falcons, right? But you could have done something like trade back to 34, pick a Will Johnson, right? Pick a corner of your choice, pick a Nick Emanwari, and then use the multiple third round picks you now had from the Giants trade to like trade up and get a Tate Ratledge at the end of the second round, something like that. Well, you had that optionality if you wanted to. They just decided to go for Donovan Jackson, which I understand with how they apparently viewed the need. I just kind of viewed it a little bit differently, right? So like in your ideal world, if you're trading back, how would you have approached it? Would you have tried to trade up like I just suggested? Or were there a couple players, you know, there at 34 that you liked and then at the late third that you might have gone for?
So it's interesting. If I were to have taken a look at my board, the number one player available was Savon Revel Jr. I was the highest in the industry on him. He was sixth on my board. I just think he's just a phenomenal football player.
I absolutely loved him. I would have taken him at 25.
Oh, 100%.
Or 24.
I wasn't sure Kwesi was going to take him there because the whole small school thing. I know some of that it could be a complete misnomer. Some of that it could just be, hey, it's too much of the Andrew Berry thing. So one of the things I did when I talked with Luke Braun about it was, okay, how many opportunities has he actually had to take a G5 guy where at a high spot? I found two instances. One of them was the Lewis Seam pick. He could have taken Logan Hall, who went one pick later. He could have taken Christian Watson, who went 2 picks later. The Vikings traded out of that Watson spot, so they had 2 shots to get him and just want to get Logan Hall. The other was Dallas Turner over Quinyon Mitchell, which if you look at the consensus board, completely understand that. I would have taken Quinyon over Turner. I was not very high on Turner. I had a second round grade on him, but I also did not get to see any of those with the film that I watched, any of the spots where he really got to drop back and showcase his ability and coverage. And then once I saw that, I kind of came around on it. But it's also, when you look at the whole spectrum, how many opportunities do you really have to take a G5 guy or a non-power 5 guy in the first round? There just aren't a ton of options. So it's something I've kind of opened my mind up with that process. And I would have probably taken Revel if the medicals were good. I was obsessed with Jahad Campbell, the Alabama linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
If the medicals were good, I would have traded up for him. I thought he could have been the special kind of difference maker where an elite level linebacker in this day and age in football can make for you. He had a similar skill set to Fred Warner. I wouldn't comp him to Fred Warner, but he can do all the things that Warner does. He can rush the passer. He can blitz. He can play the run physically. He can drop into coverage. He can run the pull in Tampa too. Being able to do all of those things at 240 pounds is special. So that would have been my guy, but dropping to 34 to me wasn't really that big of a deal because the only like guys that I thought the Vikings might have been in on, like, okay, Maxwell Hairston, Jeremiah Searles thought Josh Simmons could kick inside and play guard. So that was a guy that you could potentially draft. Like Josh Connerly Jr., I didn't think they'd have any interest in at all because there's just not enough of a power profile. This is still a zone team, but they want oomph. You can't just be like a skinny boy.
Clearly, I mean, look at what they've added. Like it's self-evident in their additions. One quick thing is it's important to note, I think, that all of the players we've talked about, like, oh, I was really excited about this guy, have those medical questions, right? And that could have played a major factor in what the Vikings wanted to do and how they valued guys. And it's kind of an interesting signal, right? Because the Vikings are so willing to take risks on injured players in free agency that they weren't willing to take risks on some of these injured players in the draft might mean something. Now, they haven't really, I think, taken many risks on injured players in the draft specifically outside of like Andrew Booth, which burned them really badly. Right. So there might be a little bit of a concern there, and they might just treat it from college being different. But I do think it's relevant to point out that literally the answer to them not being in on those players could have just been their medical information on them. They didn't see a positive outlook for it, so they kind of moved away from it.
Yeah, and I think the one guy that we can talk about is Will Johnson, who was felt like a top 5 pick going into the year. Had issues, and then he comes out right before the draft. Degenerative knee was the reporting, and it's like, okay, what does that mean? Because as much as like stuff like orthopedic stuff is science, it's also kind of an art form because not only are you using science to kind of make your judgments, you have to project it forward where it's not always clear. And if you go to like 4 different orthopedic surgeons, they may tell you 4 completely different things, even though they're looking at the same information. It's kind of like scouting. So at a certain point, even if that's a degenerative knee, if he's like a top 10 talent, at what point are you comfortable taking that guy? And I think it was the Cardinals who took him in the 50s. And they decided, okay, enough's enough. Even if he only lasts 5-6 years, I got a top 10 pick for 5 to 6 years. That's worth a second round pick. So the Vikings saying no to that, and I heard 2 things. I heard that they cleared his medicals. I heard they didn't. So I have no idea which one is true. But by passing on him, that tells you. Plus, I also don't think Brian Flores values corner as much as we think they should, because I think he sees it as a weakling system, and he just wants a style of player in there. And if he gets the elite talent, great. If he doesn't have it, I think my view on it is he thinks it's something I can just work with this and we'll be okay. It doesn't have to be an elite level player.
I mean, they've completely band-aided it the last 2 years, right? And 2 years ago it was unacceptable to the point where the players weren't good enough. And last year it was good enough to be like a top 3 defense in the NFL, right? So it did work out to some respect. And just to wrap a band-aid on this, because I don't want to spend the entire podcast talking about players the Vikings didn't draft. And this is my fault, right? I'm the one who's led us down this path. The Will Johnson thing, it just reminds me of Miles Jack, years ago, who I loved coming out of UCLA, right? Played with Barr and Kendricks in that incredible UCLA linebacker room. But his career kind of played out exactly like that, right? I think he got 3 or 4 really good seasons, signed a big contract, and then kind of fell off the map completely. So, if there is concern, and he dropped to the early second round, right? Or the mid second round or something like that. So it might be unfortunately a similar situation for Will Johnson, and the entire NFL passing on him kind of tells you it might be, right? So yeah, with that long aside of things the Vikings didn't do out of the way, why don't we get into Donovan Jackson? Really exciting addition to the Vikings offensive line, right? Because I think it completes the Vikings offensive line. Now we don't have to hem and haw about Blake Brandel potentially being the starting left guard. And like I knew Blake Brandel was cooked when Kevin O'Connell said we want to have him compete with Michael Juergens at left guard, because it's like, that's not serious competition for that. So those words kind of turned into action pretty quickly with the Donovan Jackson signing. He's a guard. He played left guard and left tackle actually after Josh Simmons, who was also a first round pick, got hurt. He kicked out to left tackle, played pretty well, went to Ohio State. He was pick number 24 on Arif's consensus board, which I referenced. He was pick 36. So it was a slight reach, right? And I think that kind of factors into the trade conversation above to me, but we'll leave that for now. Like, I'd rather, have traded back and tried to get him there. But like you said, it sounded like the Texans were going to take him at 25 regardless. So I don't think that was a realistic possibility. And he's 6'0", 3'5". So that's 6'03" and 5/8, 315 pounds with 33.5-inch arms. So, 33.5 is like a little bit less than you want a starting left tackle to have necessarily. Like, a lot of people say the threshold is 34, but those are still that's still pretty decent arm length, honestly, in the grand scheme of things. So he could play tackle in a pinch, I think, especially with Christian Darrisaw potentially being injured going on. I know I gave you a long runway for the intro there, Tyler, but give us your scouting report on Donovan Jackson, and kind of if you think, despite him being the 36 player by consensus, like he matches value at pick 24.
So this is a really interesting class because, excuse me, there really isn't a ton of difference between like pick 15 and pick 60 from a raw talent standpoint. This is not a class that cliffs really hard. Anybody who was picked at 20 could have gone at pick 40, and I don't think anybody would really bat an eye. It's a very fluid talent pool this year, and because of that, I don't really have a problem with taking the 36th player at 24. In other years, I probably would have had more of an issue with it, but this year, no. Like Gray Zabel, I had 57th on my board.
Yeah.
He was, I think, 36th. He went 18. Tyler Booker was 31? I had, let's see, where did I have Tyler Booker? I had him actually below Donovan Jackson.
And I think the lesson is there's a limited number of blue chip players in a draft class, right? And the Vikings weren't in the range to get any of those players. This year, I think we had a lot fewer blue chips than we did last year. Like, once we hit pick 10, I was like, none of these guys are any good. Like, I wouldn't want to pick them in mock drafts, right?
Once you hit pick 4,
yeah,
I think those blue chippers were done. It was Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. That's why you saw the Jaguars spend a fortune to go up and get Hunter. But it was a new regime. The Jags have been the Jags forever. The Cons mean well, but as much as they mean well, they're bad owners because they don't have, for lack of a better term, the spine to really throw their weight around. They are so rich. Like, Tony Khan obviously runs All Elite Wrestling.
Yep.
All Elite Wrestling has more capital than WWE, and WWE is like 20 times bigger than AEW. all Tony has to do is lay his dick on the table and say, F you, I'm going to war. And he could win because he can outspend them. Like, they need to be more of that instead of just more laissez-faire, nice people, which they are. And you know what? This move by Gladstone and Cohen shows you that they're ready to finally do that. And this is the class to do it, because there's just Mason Graham. I didn't like him very much. I had him 19th. He was like consensus top 5 for most people, but I saw him get washed in the run game. The length was, the second he engages, was incredibly apparent, but he was so quick and penetrating. But he had Kenneth Grant next to him. If he doesn't have that next to him in Cleveland, which I'm going to be honest, he does in Myles Garrett, just play him next to Myles Garrett every play and he'll be fine. But like, you know, what kind of player are you really going to get? So the whole conversation about these blue chip players is, it's not that big of a deal. Like I mentioned, Tyler Booker, I had him 42nd. He went 12th.
Yeah.
There was that kind of variance all night.
So was Jackson your top guard then? Like,
yes,
true guard?
I believe so. I did have him graded as a guard, not as a tackle, but I did like his tackle tape. And if you wanted to play him at tackle, I wasn't going to stop you. He got whipped by Abdul Carter in his first ever start at left tackle. You get whipped by Abdul Carter in your first ever start, I'm going to give you grace.
I'll tell you what, because I watched that game, some of that burst by Abdul Carter, like, that's rare shit, right? Like, not guys don't have that burst even at the NFL level. And I don't think he was like a complete player or anything, just from my literal only exposure to him being that game against Jackson. But like, I understand why the Athletic Traits put him at number 3 overall, right? Because he is super bursty upfield. Understandable why Donovan Jackson in his first game as left tackle had problems with him. And then if you look at the rest of the season for Donovan Jackson at left tackle, really, and granted, I watched the playoff. I kind of skipped the rest of the regular season, but like watching the playoff, I thought he was like a lockdown tackle. Now, I don't think there were like elite edge rushers that he was going against right in those games, but
he went against some pretty good edge rushers. Maybe you might be right. The only elite guy would have been against Tennessee, James Pierce Jr., who went 26 with that Falcons trade.
Oh yeah, and he didn't have like a ton of reps against Pierce. It was the other guy most of the game, I think. Yeah, because I did watch that one.
It's Tennessee. I don't like Tennessee. So Jordan Burch and Oregon. Burch is kind of like that weird tweener, but he's got juice. Like, and it's just so interesting because 5 pressures and 2 sacks allowed for a 0 pass blocking grade against Penn State. But then he had about 500 snaps left tackle the rest of the year. No sacks, 3 hits, and a whopping total of, I think it was 14 pressures and 500 snaps. You'll take that kind of production. And like, when I watched him, I think the biggest thing I came away with, Matt, was he was incredibly boring. And I don't mean that as an insult. He's just such a solid player. He's got really good technique. I like how he kind of scoop blocks, and he'll be able to torque his hips and be able to seal off run lanes. I think he
does a really good job with body positioning generally. I think there's some times, honestly, where the backs hung him out to dry in that regard a little bit. Like, not shading Judkins or Travion, because I think they were both good running backs in the tape, but like,
you can say Judkins, he can't see, man.
There were a couple vision questions I had, but also it was like other guys were getting beat and he was kind of getting beat. So like, I don't know. Positioning generally good. I thought his worst game to me, and I watched Nebraska, I watched Iowa, I watched both Oregon games, I watched Penn State, I watched Tennessee, and I watched Notre Dame. Right. So I got 3 guard games, I got 3 tackle games. I thought, besides Carter as a pass rusher, the player he struggled most against was Yaya Black, the guy from Iowa, who I think went to the 49ers in like the 5th round. He got shed a lot by him, but that was like the only complaint I had, is like, against 330-pound defensive tackles, he doesn't get a ton of movement, and like, they can win with technique in some circumstances, right? So,
well, part of the thing with Black though, Matt, is he's got like 35-inch arms.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
long.
Yeah, he was huge, dude. He's massive. And that's like, if my biggest complaint about Donovan Jackson is like he's just okay against massive nose tackles in the run game, like I don't think that's much of a problem, to be honest with you. Right? Like you're not going to find guys who are going to dominate those on a consistent basis unless they're the elite of the elite in the NFL.
Mhm. I did find that he was really good against my boy Jamari Caldwell from Oregon.
Yeah,
I
he had great
loved
games
him.
against Caldwell, both games.
Yeah, and just I think his movement skills are kind of akin to Ed Ingram's movement skills, where they're good enough where you can get him pulling, you can get him reaching in wide zone, but it's not what he's great at, but it's good enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as a linear mover, I that dude will just plow right over you. And I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot to like. The anchor's good. Like, I don't think he gets pushed back a lot unless he's dealing with like somebody who's really long. But even so, like being just under 6'4", he's short enough where he's able to squat down with his butt and get up underneath you to really prevent you from winning the leverage battle.
Yeah,
And
I
I
don't
think
think
those
I
things.
saw a rep where he lost an anchor like badly, right? Like there are a
Mhm.
couple where he got driven back consistently, but from an anchor perspective, I have absolutely no questions about it. Like I thought his play strength was great in the pass pro game. Like I mentioned with like Black and a couple reps with Caldwell, but the one Nebraska defensive tackle stood him up a couple times in the run game where he wasn't able to like get a good drive on it. But like again, I'm being nitpicky there because he was driving back the smaller like 3 technique defensive tackles every single time he got his hands on them in the run game, right? It's like the guys whose job are to stand still against the run and not let you get push on them, they can slow him down, right? But I don't think anybody else can, and I'm totally fine with that from a prospect profile.
No, 100%. And like, I just keep going back to this guy is boring.
Yeah,
And he is, but that's not an insult. It's good. Hey, he's technically sound. He's not overly explosive. He's not overly athletic, but he's stout. He's not going to let you just whip his butt, and he's going to make an impact and drive forward, especially in the run game. Red Zone with Jordan Mason is going to be must-watch television this year. After Red Zone being a disaster zone this past year, like they're
we're
gonna
actually
just
gonna win in short yardage for the first time in like I don't know. Did we win in 2019? I guess we won in like 2019 in short yardage, but
Mhm.
it's been forever since we've been good in the run game in those scenarios, right? Like Kevin O'Connell, I think 2022, he did a fantastic job like drawing stuff up in terms of all the designs and stuff, and we had good success rates in the red zone, but it wasn't because of the running game, right? Like we're actually going to be able to push people back and score touchdowns, I think. One other thing I wanted to bring up with Jackson is I thought he was really a really heady player. Like he was always finding the right direction to block people, good at looking for work, and really good on stunts in terms of picking up and reacting to shifting defenders in front of him.
The stunts were great.
Yeah,
It was like Ed Ingram had a problem. Like I was Ed Ingram's biggest defender, which I didn't love him, but I thought he was better than people were giving him credit for.
yep.
It's just the losses they looked so egregious that I think people just extrapolated way too much on it because there was a lot of good I thought with his game, but the one thing he was bad at was it was almost like his eyes drooped down and he was looking at feet when those stunts happened, and all of a sudden he was just getting whipped.
He
And
was
Jackson doesn't have.
he was such an inconsistent player, right? Where
Mhm.
he had some really nice highlights and generally the play was fine, but the lowlights were so bad that it really made it a struggle at offensive line. And I agree with you. I think Jackson's the opposite of that.
Yeah, Jackson just keeps his head up. He keeps his butt low so often and so nice to see. And when he kind of senses a guy's going to be the crasher, he gets his hands on him, and then he just does this slight little wiggle over and then protects the backside and just makes it look so effortless and easy. Like it's going to be so great to have like guys that can do stunts because I thought Brandel was pretty good with Darisaw. The second Cam Robinson came in, it was like everything just fell off a cliff for both of those guys. Like they just did not know how to communicate together. They didn't know how to pass stuff off. And then it culminated in just two of the worst games we've seen our offensive line play in some time against the Lions and Rams to finish the year. Just being able to have that kind of security where I know that these guys are really good at this aspect of the game is going to make things so much easier for McCarthy, who's already a relatively quick decision maker, at least coming from the college level. That could extrapolate into being an even bigger weapon because of what they're able to do against stunts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another note I had on him, which again, staying on the positive side, is I thought he was a strong finisher. Right? It's not like he's not like I don't know the oh I'm blanking on a guy from last year who's like crazy, but like I think he competes through the end of the rep. You see him on top of people like all the time for pancakes and things like that, and that's just kind of stuff you like to see from players. And then a couple negatives, and I'm kind of interested to get your take on him, is I think like he does a pretty good job with body positioning and people getting people out of the blocks, but I thought I saw some reps where like especially in pass protection where he wasn't moving his lower half probably as much as he should, right? And he kind of relies on that upper body strength and that torquing a little bit too often to me, and I think that can get you holding calls in the NFL. Like there were a lot of situations where running backs are running away from him, and you have a defender with like one arm out, and he's kind of ripping at the chest plate, right? And I think that gets called more often in the NFL. Or on disengagements, like he'd get underneath the shoulder pads on the outside, and I think that can be problematic. But like it's also something that wasn't a consistent problem, right? It's just, and it's not like he was called for holding all the time at the college level. I'm just kind of interested to see how that'll turn out at the NFL level, right? And again, it's pretty nitpicky, right? But I don't know if you have anything on that or what you think.
I kind of agreed. It would be nice to see him just move his feet a little more.
Yeah.
Almost like his kind of got.
And like when he attaches to guys in the run game, he has fantastic foot drive. And I think there are a bunch of reps of him mirroring defensive tackles pretty well. But against the quicker guys, I think he loses a bit more.
No, I agree. I would like to see him like get the cinder blocks off a little bit. And
yeah,
I wonder how much of that might be a coaching point at Ohio State versus what he might get from Chris Cooper once he comes to the NFL. How much are they going to prioritize? Like, hey, don't just like use your upper body strength. Really keep those feet moving. Prevent like if you have to anchor obviously, but if they're not pushing you back to where you have to plant into the ground, drive forward and bury. Like Christian Darrisaw was not a finisher in college. Found out that was a Virginia Tech thing. Second he gets to the NFL, he just decides, I want to be like Trent Williams. I want to kill people. And he does. And it's beautiful. So how much of that can you get from Donovan Jackson with some proper NFL coaching? I think that could be a really, really interesting element to trying to project his game forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And athletically, I think he checks the boxes, right? Like he's not a super athlete. We kind of talked about his movement skills where he'll be fine on like the mid zone stuff. We kind of prefer. He's good as a puller. I think he hits his targets. I think he gets to the second level. I think he actually does a really good job of hitting targets at the second level. Like he's not whiffing on linebackers when he gets there. He doesn't necessarily fully envelop them. So I think there's maybe a little bit of like, he's not the elite athlete, right? He's not a Garrett Bradbury out in space, but you make the trade-off of not having a Garrett Bradbury out in space by having a player who's like powerful, right? So like, I'm totally willing to make that trade-off like 10 times out of 10, honestly.
No, I agree with you. I feel really good kind of about where things are at with him. And I think that you can, like, I don't think he's going to ever elevate to like a multi-time Pro Bowl, or maybe he makes one or two. He's not going to be like an 8 or 9 Pro Bowl kind of year guy, but I think you can rely on him. Like, I think your outlook is this is David Dixon, where he's just going to be a dude that's going to be really solid for you for 10 plus years. And there's a lot of value to that.
Yep.
But I don't think he ever gets to a level where you're considering him for a lot of those postseason lists, which, you know what? That's fine. And I think the biggest argument against taking that player is because he does not have that potential. But if it solidifies the offensive lineup for JJ McCarthy, just balls out and all of a sudden wins comeback player of the year, which would be really funny because he never really got started.
That it would be
Then
incredible, honestly.
yeah, it would be. And that could really elevate this team to a whole nother stratosphere. And I think that element is what the Vikings are trying to do. They fixed edge rusher last year. This year, they fixed the trenches. Next year, I bet it's the secondary.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And like you said, the downside of a Donovan Jackson is maybe you don't have the high level upside of becoming an elite player. But I think that was very limited in this draft. And the guys we talked about, the Vikings potentially missing out on by making this pick early in this show, like Ravel or like maybe Jihad Campbell, right? Or maybe Will Johnson, all had those injury concerns that make you really scared for their total upside. So it makes sense as a decision-making thing to me because like nobody else who was drafted after him really stands out as somebody I think is going to be like a multi-time all-pro, at least at positions the Vikings had a clear need at, right? And I was like very low on Nick Emmanwori and I was low on Malachi Starks, right? So people might think differently about those guys, but that's neither here nor there because they're not Vikings. We'll keep it moving here. And we'll go, with the Vikings second pick where they took pick 97, right? They traded back 5 spots with I don't even remember who at this point, and they moved. Sorry,
Texans.
The Texans, right? And then they moved up like 45 spots, and they used the 45 spots that they moved up to 142 to trade back and get Sam Howell. We'll touch on Sam Howell real quick in a little bit, but before they acquired Sam Howell, they took Tai Felton, the wide receiver out of Maryland. He was 6'01" and 1/8, so 6'1", 1/8 of an inch. It was 183, so pretty skinny, right? But a speedster. He ran a 4.37 with elite jumps, and the only agility he ran was the short shuttle, which was pretty mediocre, all things considered, but great, burst, right? And a mediocre shuttle is more than good enough if you have that kind of speed, right? Like you don't want to turn away like a boat, especially if you're only 183, but from an athletic perspective, obviously it checks a lot of boxes. I know nothing about him as a player, so enlighten me, Tyler.
So one of the interesting things I think with Felton is the entire offense at Maryland ran through him. And if you are having an entire offense run through you at a major P4 institution, that says a lot about who you are as a player. And Maryland isn't necessarily the best program, but Mike Locksley does have a good one, and he gets big boy recruits. He does get 5 stars to go there. Usually they stay home and they go to Maryland. But like Chop Robinson, before he went to Penn State, he spent a year at Maryland. 5-star guy. Like those kind of guys regularly pass through that program, but they're usually on defense, not on offense. So one interesting thing kind of about him is because that offense flowed through him, some of like the underlying metrics weren't necessarily great. His average depth of target was only 9.9 yards. They're getting him the ball a lot in short spaces, trying to let him work with it. Of his 1,119 yards, 590 of them were after the catch. So he's doing a lot of work by himself to be able to maximize that. And I think some of the agility concerns that you mentioned, Matt, with like the short shuttle, he's a track guy. And you can see that burst, as you mentioned, that long speed on film. He's got return ability. He needs to find a way to get stronger. One interesting thread line that I've kind of noticed with Kwesi Oplemensa is he doesn't give a crap if you're slender. If you can play, he'll take you. This is the 5th guy that they have taken or signed as UDFA that's stuck around that's been under 190 pounds.
I've hated on that like 5 different times, right? Like I hated on it pre-draft before we took Jordan Addison. I was like, what is taking a 170-pound receiver in the first round? Definitely wrong on that one. I hated on it with Mekhi Blackman a little bit, right? Even though I thought he was a bit more competitive. And Addison honestly was pretty competitive too. So if he needs to get strong, is he like competitive or really, you really see the lack of size show up on tape?
Yeah. It's those 2 guys. Jay Ward was 188 pounds. Dwight McGlothern was like 180 pounds soaking wet at step 2. And then you have Tai Felton, who's 6'1.5", 180 pounds. But that play strength really does show up. It shows up at the catch point. It shows up when he's initiated contact. if he's making people miss, but he's not running through arm tackles. And that is some of like a problem. He's an effort blocker. I think the effort is fine, but his play strength just isn't. I think if you don't want him to gain a bunch of weight, but if you can get him to gain 5, 6, 7 pounds of muscle and just learn a little bit better technique with some of those things, I think he'll be okay. His contested catch rate is 38.5% over the course of his college career, which not phenomenal, but college quarterbacks stink, especially when they play at Maryland.
Yeah.
Like contested catches are just different. You want to see that number higher, but half the time a contested catch is just a poorly thrown football and that ball gets knocked down due to no fault of your own. So I think one thing he really needs to figure out, and I think Keenan McCardell will help him fix it, he tips off his routes. He does not keep that a secret. And McCardell was one of the better route runners of his era, and he was an undrafted guy. Like he understands how to maneuver. He understands how to teach it. But as Kwesi said, you cannot teach speed. He's got that. He's got the ability to burst. It's something this offense just does not have. It kind of does with Naylor, but I think that Felton feels faster than Naylor on tape. And Naylor's probably not going to be on the team next year, which is one of the reasons why we're making this pick. Plus,
to be clear, in 2026, obviously, because he's going to be an impending free agent. Somebody will probably pay him like $10 million because, I don't know, Joshua Palmer got like 13 or something like that. So I don't know. Yeah. The NFL loves paying bad wide receivers.
They do. And one thing that I think with Felton is really important, kick return ability. Remember, they changed the kickoff, so touchbacks are at the 35-yard line. They're at the 30, okay. 35, now that's too close. So you're going to see a lot more kick returns. And a guy like Felton, with that kind of speed, you give him a crease, he can house it. That is going to be an interesting element, at least initially, for him making an impact on the field. And the idea is that this guy can be your number 3 probably as early as next year.
Yeah. So you mentioned the kick return ability. I'm gathering he's not like super quick. Obviously, he's more of a long speed guy. That probably means he doesn't have much punt return ability. Like I don't know what he did in college or didn't do. So
he did return kicks.
Okay. But not punts.
He returned 2 punts for 17 yards last year. 2022, he returned 6 kicks for 143 yards. So the experience is relatively limited, but you see a vision with how he sees the field, with how once the ball gets in his hands, how he attacks vertically. And those elements can translate to the NFL. You can translate them from being a receiver to being a returner. So he's got a chance to win one of those jobs.
No, absolutely. That's definitely a good thing. And honestly, once you get into the late 3rd round, like you're not expecting a guy to be anywhere close to a day 1 starter, right? You're expecting him to be hopefully a rotational piece who can be a role player for you. And then also if he has special teams ability, that's a huge plus for him making the team year after year, right? Like he's definitely going to make the team year 1 because you made the investment and you think he's talented enough that he can grow into like a long-term starter that you're going to want to keep him there even if he sucks at special teams, right? But for him to make the team in year 2 and year 3, he has to show some special teams value or show like really good on-field value, right? So he at least has somewhat of a path there. One other note, because it sounds like he's, more of a developmental prospect who we want to fill out more. He's only 22 and he's 22 right now. But he'll be about 22 and a half when the season starts. All of the players that the Vikings drafted are going to be 22 when the season starts. Nobody's going to be 23, 24, 25, except one of their UDFAs that they added. But
BYU, that almost doesn't count.
Right. You went on a 2-year mission, so there you go. But so these are relatively young players. It's no super young players, right? Nobody's going to be 21, which is like about as young as you get. But they are all relatively young players, so that's kind of interesting. I also didn't mention Felton was the consensus 129th player. We took him at 102. So obviously a little bit of a reach by consensus, but once you get that far down, like 20 picks is kind of nothing in terms of the overall value and average for those players. So it's not that big of a deal.
It's about finding fit at that point, which sometimes exactly. Fit is not going to align with talent.
Exactly. And you have a tier of like 5 different wide receivers that are relatively interchangeable, but the consensus has one guy over the other. It's like you poll 20 people, they're gonna have Felton higher than some guys and lower at others. So you have Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, which is going to be a tongue twister to me, mostly because of the running back that went to the 49ers. I'm going to keep calling him like Davis Price or something like that. But he's an interior defensive lineman, I think. At least a base end / 4i kind of guy, just based on his size. From Georgia, obviously an absolutely loaded, stacked with talent defense in Georgia, like every single year. He measured in at 6'04" and 3/4 with 276 pounds. So light, would need to add weight probably to play a bit more on the interior, or is more of an interior pass rush option. And I'll let you tell me that specifically. With 33.5-inch arms. If you look at him as a defensive tackle, he's an absolutely ridiculous athlete. If you look at him as an edge rusher, he's still like an elite, very good athlete. The 40 holds him back as an edge rusher is 4.86, but that's phenomenal for a defensive tackle. He had a 7.28 3-cone as well, which is phenomenal for a defensive tackle, right? For an interior guy, that's awesome. For an edge rusher type, that's pretty mediocre, I would say. But on the larger side of edges, it's still not bad, right? And he had really good jumps as well that were kind of an elite tier. I think it was like 36 or something on the vert, which is really good for anybody who's not a super freak at edge, right? Trying to jump 40 inches or something like that. So Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, what do you got on him, Tyler?
So Ingram-Dawkins is an idea right now. He's not really a good football player, but you see a lot of flashes of him being a really good football player. They're just
And this is
not
what?
as
This is
often.
139, so that's a 5th round pick, right? Like, you're not going to get a complete football player with a 5th round pick, or you're going to get an extremely limited football player, right? Those are your two options.
Mhm. But the athleticism pops. It's really, really evident on tape. This is Jihad Ward in a more athletic package. Like, that's the idea. He's a really quick penetrator. He's got relatively long arms to be able to really wreak havoc. He's had some really impactful games, and then he kind of disappears for stretches. He had 5 pressures and a sack against Kentucky. He had 4 pressures and 2 sacks against Auburn, but that was about half of his 19 pressures on the year. He's kind of a rotational guy, even though he was a starter. Like, he played 63 snaps against Kentucky, 50 against Georgia Tech, and then never played more than 45 the rest of the year. A lot of rotation with that Georgia Bulldogs defense. Like, the thing with Georgia is they get all these hyper athletes. They ask him to do like one thing, and then they don't develop the rest of their game. We saw that with Travon Walker. He was just one of the best run defenders I've seen come out of college. He had no idea what to do as a pass rusher. Now he's entering year 4 in the NFL. He's coming off back-to-back 10.5 sack seasons. He's figured it out. And I think with Ingram-Dawkins, you get him in a specific role where he can be either in the Pat Jones role or the Jihad Ward role, depending on what like what package you're doing, what front you're using. And I think he can wreak havoc and he can do a lot of things. He can be a looper in stunts. He can crash. He can just be a quick penetrator as like a 3-tech or even a 1-tech and do a lot of things to just make things difficult on the offense. But he is so far from even close to a like standard player because the flashes come and then they go quickly. If you can get any form of consistency out of him, this is a really good guy to have in your room. I think you don't want to put any like extra weight on him, maybe 5 or 10 pounds. I think this is more of a sub package player, base end kind of guy. I think that's useful. I think Brian Flores could be more apt to maybe have 4 down linemen, especially with a guy like Dallas Turner who can be fluid, who can play off the ball, who can play on the ball, and that can give you options. Plus, you can stand up Ingram-Dawkins and you can play him as a wide 9. So that kind of versatility emphasizes a lot of how Brian Flores wants to play on defense. But it's not just about versatility. It's about you still have to be good. And I think Ingram-Dawkins is a little ways away from being a regular rotational guy. But by year 4, there is a path where this guy is a plus starter. It's probably in like the 15th or 20th percentile. But there's a real path to get there because of the athletic profile, because of what we've seen in those bursts on film. This is a perfect kind of dart throw to throw in round 5. If it works,
Yeah.
great. If it doesn't, you can go to Ziggy Wolf and be like, look at this profile. Look at the flashes. We thought we could harness and develop it, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, this is the perfect range to make that bet.
You're not getting fired off of 5th round picks, probably. So it's certainly worth it to make the bet. And I do find it interesting that you mentioned Jihad Ward, because I think it's critical to understand that, like, if you have a kind of tweener player like this in Dawkins, right, who's probably not going to be the best edge prospect in the world, but also might not be big enough to play full-time inside, you have to have a role for that sort of player on your defense, and the Vikings do, right? Jihad Ward was a pass rush down interior pass rusher last year. He didn't do anything else. He had like 400 plus snaps, and 300 plus of them were on the interior as a pass rusher. When he did see a little bit of run late in the season, it was in the Jerry Tillery role, also an undersized player, right, who the Vikings brought in to play that. So I do think that's the role Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins profiles into. It's also the role I profile Javon Hargrave into, right? And Hargrave is actually pretty stout for his size, right? He's a smaller player, but he's like still over 300 pounds despite being like just over 6'2" or something like that. But I think that's kind of the understudy that you want there. Obviously but the Vikings also need a bigger base end, right? They need somebody to replace what Pat Jones was doing. So he might be able to have some flexibility into that, just based on how you described him to me. So real quick, I do want to touch on the Sam Howell trade, right? Because Ingram-Dawkins was pick 139. He was the consensus 170th player. And then the Vikings had a pick at 142 due to the trade back where they got Tai Felton. But they traded that and got 172 back. So, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but if you were following along, they basically took 97 and 187 to get 102, Sam Howell, and 172, right? So they moved down 5 spots to move up 15 spots and also pick up Sam Howell. If you look at the move down 5 spots to move up 15 spots, on my trade calculators, it's like a relatively even trade. Honestly, like, you lose a little bit of value, but it's like almost even. So you almost get Sam Howell for free, right, in this trade.
And then they turned 172 into 201 and 202.
Yeah, right. Which is obviously going to be a win. It probably wasn't a win on the regular charts, but it's always going to be a win for that on the analytics charts. Right, and they turned 172 into 102 and 202. So quick on Sam Howell, obviously profiles as the Vikings backup quarterback. I don't love him as a player personally. Like, it's a little bit of size profiling for me to do this, right? But like, he doesn't have an elite arm, right? Which I don't think like Baker Mayfield has an elite arm. He throws a pretty ball. But I just don't think he has an elite arm. He's got like fine accuracy, and he has no pocket presence. So it's like Baker Mayfield minus, or maybe minus, right, as a player. But obviously he has starter experience. You're not going to be a complete embarrassment, or at least the NFL in general is going to understand if you put him into a football game. He can probably be a little bit of fun, right? Like, he's willing to move around in the pocket. He's willing to try to extend plays, even if he doesn't do a good job of it, right? And which is why he took so many sacks with Washington. But in general, like, for basically free, given the fact that if you look at any of the free agency backup options, there wasn't anything really viable, and Brett Rippon isn't a great, option, and you don't have to waste a draft pick on somebody who you think is a developmental player. Like, I think adding Sam Howell's fine. I don't know if you have a different take on Sam Howell than that.
I think Sam Howell's the perfect backup quarterback. He's got a good enough arm. He's gritty. He can run. He's got flaws because, of course, he does. He's a backup. Like, this league has like 20 good quarterbacks, 7 that we're still trying to figure out if they're good, and the rest of them, it really doesn't matter outside of a Case Keenum Linsanity run. If I'm going to have a backup, I like the fact that he's got wheels. He's got guts. Kevin O'Connell can help, like, at least file down some of the negatives and improve the pocket presence a little bit and make things easy for him. Washington didn't make anything easy for him. 1 year he was a starter. Now, he did a lot of that to himself, but 65 sacks is one of the highest numbers in NFL history. I also think he had one of the highest attempt numbers in NFL history. That team just threw the ball everywhere. So I love the fact that he's the backup. I also think at the price, it's phenomenal at $1.1 million. All you had to do was a little bit of trade maneuvering. And as you said, you did not give up a pick. I think this is the perfect backup. Like, I couldn't have asked for much better. And you can even go to the argument, well, he's not really a veteran to help McCarthy. You have that in the room already with Josh McCown. And Sam
Mm-hmm.
Howell was a starter and failed and got replaced and traded twice. So he's got a different kind of experience to be able to help McCarthy succeed. Rippon's been on a few franchises. Like O'Connell was a failed NFL
Yeah.
quarterback. I don't think it's as big of a deal with this Vikings organization to have a guy like Joe Flacco in the room. I'd rather have a young whippersnapper like Howell who can run and move and make plays. There are obvious flaws, and there's a reason why he's not a starter. He's zero threat to McCarthy. But if he has to come
Yep.
in and play for 4 games, I'm confident this team goes 2-2. And you know what? You can't feel that much better than that in a realistic sense with a backup.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things we had two things I want to pull out. I think you did a really good job. Like, JJ McCarthy has enough mentoring going on in his life. Like, it's not really that critical for him, although having smart guys in the quarterback room is always good, right? You always want a refresh of ideas there and kind of that discussion in the pregame, right? Because these guys are all game planning for specific teams, and they all come up with ideas. So if you have smart, engaged people in the room, that's going to help you. But with Howell, another important thing that you said is he's not coming for JJ McCarthy's job. Like, I know there were like some insane Seahawks fans, and it's probably people who only play fantasy football who was like, Sam Howell threw for a bunch of yards last year. Maybe he's good, right? But like, there were some insane
They all
Seahawks
hated,
fans
yeah.
who wanted to see what would happen, right? And like, the Seahawks universe is absolutely in shambles generally about Geno Smith being gone and Sam Darnold being in, right? But like, I guess there was also a Substack who hated Geno Smith, right? So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. But he's not going to be a starter. He's not going to push JJ McCarthy to start, in my opinion, just because he doesn't have the tools to me to be that level of starter, and the other flaws in his game prevent him from, making up for the lack of tools by being a perfect player, right? So that combination is kind of deadly for being a starter quarterback. But like you said, as a backup, that's pretty reasonable. And I think he's also in the 4th year of his deal. So some team's going to be stupid enough to pay him like $5 to $10 million next year, just because that's how quarterbacks work in the NFL. And we're going to get another comp pick for another quarterback. So it's going to be phenomenal, masterful maneuvering by Kwesi. It's going to work out great. I don't know how much longer you have, but I'd love to keep you around at least for another, 10 or 15 minutes to try to get through these last couple people. So next one, we talked about the trade back, right? 172 for 201 and 202. The first of those two picks was Kobe King, a linebacker from Penn State. He was consensus 176. So he's the first a win on the consensus board, like I talked about with Tai Felton. At this range, like, unless you're dipping way down into like the 300s, like, you're not reaching too bad. And unless you're getting a guy who's like ranked like 80th or something, you're not getting that much of a win, right? So fine by consensus. He's a bit on the smaller side, right? He's 6'006, which is 6 foot and 3/4 of an inch. 236 pounds, right? So 236 is pretty much the range for linebackers in the NFL these days. Like, that's pretty much like standard, right? So I wouldn't say he's small, and especially being shorter, like with Ivan Pace, you have more mass, right? Like, you're thicker as a player, so it's not really that much of a concern to me. He's got 31 and 2.5 inch arms, so longer than both Ivan Pace and Blake Cashman. The short arms watch for the Vikings linebackers is always really funny, I think. He ran a 4.6, which is pretty mid. He had mid jumps and agility. So basically, he's an average athlete, but a little bit undersized for the position, which is probably what drops him down, right? So I don't know if you have overall thoughts on him. Do you think he's a rotational player? Do you think he's a special teams player? Where do you think he excels?
I think he excels at having a twin brother who's a member of the Green Bay Packers. His brother, Kalen King, was a 7th round pick last year. He was corner. I think the best
Wait,
way
is
to
he the
describe
one that was like supposed to be a first round pick and then he fell all the way down to the end of the draft?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. Oh. Kobe King, run fast, hit hard. He's right now he's a 2-down linebacker. I think you can develop a little bit of the pass coverage stuff. It feels more like he
So
just
Ivan
needs
Pace
better
back
coaching.
up day one.
Yeah, I do think like if you need to rotate Blake Cashman out of some plays, like maybe toward the end of the year or next year, I think you can maybe get Kobe King like an extra like 10 snaps to give Blake Cashman a little bit of a rest. Not a lot, but enough to where you can keep him fresher. Like I think he's going to be a core special teamer. I think there's a
Mhm.
chance he can develop into a starting 2-down linebacker. Maybe he can be a 3-down guy. Like I'm not the biggest on Ivan Pace. I think there's some limitations, but I think what he's really good at, he's really good at. I just prefer him in a little bit more of a specialist role where you're playing him like closer to 40 snaps a game and ask him to do the things he's really good at instead
I
of
would say I agree with you where if Ivan Pace stays the same player that he is right now, I would be scared to pay him in 2 years. Like next year, he'll be an RFA, so you can get away with that just fine. But in 2 years, if he has a big payday coming up, like I would be scared to pay that with the player he
me too.
currently is.
Me too. I think he's an absolute steal for UDFA. I think he would have been a steal as a 4th-round pick, which is
I
good.
think he's an awesome football player. Like he's so much fun to
Mhm.
watch. Also, I think he does have limitations that hold me back from calling him a true, 3-down linebacker or somebody who you want to be the number one linebacker on your team. And I think the impact plays he makes is going to make him somebody who's valuable enough to another team that they're going to pay him more money than he should probably get if his skill set stays the same.
I agree completely. And Kobe King could potentially be a guy to develop into a starter,
Hmm.
not a plus starter, but a starting level 2-down linebacker. Like Ben Gedeon was a starter as a rookie but that guy also only played like 20 snaps a game. I think it would be a little bit higher level than that. Somebody who plays 30, 40 snaps and could potentially be a really good guy against the run. I do think there's limitations in coverage, which is going to limit his overall effectiveness. But I do think there's growth potential there, which is really intriguing. Hunters, like, you're getting almost a 30 pick surplus on the consensus board, and at this point, you need core special teamers. I think Kobe King can be that from day one. I think Asamoah's days are numbered.
Yeah, I mean, and all Asamoah is a special teamer, right? So
Yeah,
they don't play him at linebacker. They're terrified of playing him at linebacker. So I totally see that. Yeah. So the next pick was Gavin Bartholomew, a tight end out of Pitt. Obviously the Vikings only had Josh Oliver and TJ Hawkinson on the roster, so great to see, they addressed it somehow, right? He was pick 202, consensus 270. He measured in 604 and 5/8 at 246 pounds, so a little bit light for a tight end. He ran a 4.7 flat. He had great jumps. He ran a 7-second flat 3-cone, which is like awesome for a tight end. He ran a 4.3 second shuttle. He was allergic to hundredths of a second in any of his testing. Um, but no, so really good athlete despite being undersized. I put him up as an edge rusher just to kind of see how it would go because I was like 7-second 3-cone, 246. That's not bad. He's also elite as an athlete, as an edge rusher. But it's kind of funny as well. His third athletic comparable, and I think it's reciprocal on the RAS website, is TJ Hawkinson. So Hawkinson was a little bit bigger, but from an athletic testing standpoint, they're very similar. I thought that was kind of neat. What do you have the lowdown on Gavin Bartholomew? Obviously, so like just based on my looking at his athletics profile, right? I'm like, okay, this is kind of a receiving tight end who hopefully provides you a little bit after the catch and probably is a work in progress as a blocker, but that's just me literally profiling him based off of his athletic testing, right? So what do you think?
so he was a guy that played pretty much right away from day one. He started about half the year as a freshman in 2021. And then he essentially became a full-time starter in 2022. He's been productive, but I spoke with a good friend of mine who's a Pitt beat writer, and he said, you were going to love Bartholomew. They used him incorrectly his entire time at Pitt. And one of the big things that he told me was like, this guy's an H. Like,
Okay.
this is a slower version of Irv Smith Jr. This is what you're getting. And if you can utilize some of that skill set, maybe you get 5 to 10 pounds on him and he becomes a better blocker. He doesn't have great length. It's only like 31.5-inch arms. But if you can improve some of those elements, like there's a lot to like as a receiver. He's natural with the ball in his hands. He's not just a linear athlete. He can do a little bit of everything. And you can have him up the seams. You can get him the ball in space. He's got one play against Tennessee from a couple years ago where he hurdled a dude and then took it to the house. Like he's a good athlete. The one thing that I have concerned with Bartholomew is when you look at where he's at, and then you look at the 2 UDFAs they brought in, and Ben Yurosek from Georgia and Bryson Nesbitt from North Carolina, I'm not convinced that Bartholomew is better than either of those players. Because like Yurosek at one point was talked about maybe having like top 50 potential when he was at Stanford. Then he goes to Georgia and it's buried on the depth chart and like never gets to play, which ends up just cratering his stock. And Nesbitt was in a very pass happy offense, caught a lot of passes and was hyper productive. So is Bartholomew going to beat out either of those guys? Those are your 3 options right now for tight end 3. So he's got a leg up because being a 6th round pick gives you an in-house advantage. Is he going to be able to keep that? I do not know. But there is hope for like him. Like if you understand how to use a player like Irv Smith Jr. and use a player as an H and allow him to do a lot of the athletic stuff that he can do, there's upside to him.
Mm-hmm.
But how limited is he going to be as a blocker? Can you grow that profile with any form of significance? That's going to really answer the question on whether he can be a plus professional or if he's just another guy.
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting because Yurosek and Nesbitt have roughly the same dimensions that Bartholomew does. Like they're all a similar size player. So I think they were looking for kind of that type that can be more of an H-back and maybe isn't as much of an inline guy. You know, and that kind of makes sense as a Johnny Munt replacement, who they use Johnny Munt like exclusively in line, but he was a second tight end and they like to get him the ball in the flat and things like that, right? Like I always said, you know, find yourself someone who loves you as much as Kevin O'Connell loves Johnny Munt, just because like he always seemed to design a little something for him while he was in the game. And, you know, I think the key for a player like him will be being competitive as a blocker, right? You don't need to be overwhelming as a blocker. You don't need to be a fantastic blocker, but you do need to absolutely be competitive. And that's something the Vikings will clearly ask you to do if you're that size. So no, it's interesting. You know, there's athletic potential and upside there, but like you said, they also brought in a couple UDFA tight ends. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that competition. I don't mind the path the Vikings took at the tight end position, right? Like, I don't think there was a lot of value in free agency. Clearly, Josh Oliver is your blocking tight end, right? Like, you don't need to sign a guy for $1 million who's a pure blocking tight end. So at least get some receiving upside with some of these guys that you're bringing in. I don't mind that at all.
And I was a really big fan of Rondé Gadsden the second out of Syracuse because I thought his receiving profile was tremendous. And I can teach a guy how to be a little bit of a better blocker if there's effort there. I can't teach you how to be a great receiver. And I think all 3 of these guys are they're plus receivers at the college level. So if I can improve the other element of the game, which blocking is so much, as much as it's physical, it's so much more about finesse and technique and less about athleticism. If I can get you at least to a passable point there, I have a good football player. And we're only asking for tight end 3. We're not asking for you to be a regular contributor. So I like where they're going here. I can develop the other areas. I'm going to take the ones that I can't.
Yeah. So no, it's absolutely I think the way to look at it, especially through the lens of like what the Vikings currently have on their roster. So that wraps up the draft. I think Donovan Jackson is exciting as the person who completes the Vikings offensive line, right? Like, I think we should be really excited about the offense the Vikings are going to be able to put up on the field, even if we sacrificed a little bit of defensive improvement, maybe by taking him in the draft, right? And then it's a bunch of guys who you kind of hope become something, right? So it's maybe not the most like, oh, we got 5 guys who are going to be starters in this draft, right? And guess what? You're not going to ever get 5 guys that are going to be starters in the draft unless you knock every single pick out of the park, which the Vikings have done, 10 years ago, right? Actually, exactly 10 years ago with the 2015 draft. But those are rare, one team does it a year types of situations, or one team does it every other year, right? You got the 2017 Saints are another great example. Some of those Seahawks draft, like the 2011 Seahawks draft or something like that, was an absolutely insane one. So I don't think this is an insane one brewing, but I do like the depth that they were able to provide at certain positions, and I love the completeness of the offensive line after the scope of the full offseason, right? It wouldn't surprise me if there were a corner move on the horizon for a veteran corner, just because they lack any sort of size in that room at all. Like, literally, Mekhi Blackman at 5'11" with 31-inch arms or under 31-inch arms is the tallest, longest player in that cornerback room, right? I guess McLaughlin is. I shouldn't skip over him, but like, I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch kind of with either of those guys. So it wouldn't shock me if they added a big veteran corner. But I do want to get into the UDFAs a little bit. I'm going to run through the names really quickly, and it's all available on the Vikings website. And then I want you to give me, any tidbits you have on these guys. So Logan Brown, offensive tackle at Kansas, was 143rd by consensus. He's like the Kwesi number one, like top UDFA that we kind of signed this year is kind of how I view him. Tyler Batty is an edge from BYU. We referenced this earlier, but he is like 25 or 26 years old or something. He's crazy old.
26 on Friday.
There we go. He was 239th by consensus. So like, should have been drafted by consensus. Max Brosmer, who I'm sure people who listen to this podcast are familiar with, obviously the quarterback from Minnesota. He got $250,000. I didn't see the money on any of these other players, but that's a lot for UDFA guaranteed. So they obviously like him. He was 256 by consensus. Then we have Trey Stewart from Jacksonville State. He's a running back. He's pretty small. He didn't have great athletic testing, but I think you really like him, so I'll let you give a talk on him then. Zamiah Vaughn, a corner from Utah, is tall and long. Keenan Garber, a corner from Kansas State, is an absurd athlete. Like, his athletic testing was off the charts. Silas Bolden, a wide receiver from Texas, is tiny. He's like minuscule. He's like 160 pounds, 5'7", something like that. He might be a returner, I think, just based off of that profile. Robert Lewis, a wide receiver from Auburn, had horrible athletic testing, so kind of the flip side. Dante Fleming, a wide receiver from Tulane. Yurosek and Nesbitt, we kind of talked about a bit. Austin Keys, a linebacker from Auburn. Chaz Chambliss, a linebacker from Georgia. Dorian Mousey, a linebacker from Auburn. Are any of the guys edge rushers? Do you know anything about them?
No. So the one guy that I know a couple guys.
Yeah.
Batty. One thing that's interesting is each of the 3 years that Kwesi Pimenta has done this, they have kept a total of 8 UDFAs on the initial 53.
Yep.
4 of them have been edge rushers. At least one edge rusher per year. So that's an interesting trend.
One of them was really bad. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I'm still not over Andre Carter.
Yeah. The idea made a lot of sense, but he just did not make enough improvement over year one. But Batty got almost $250,000 guaranteed, $20,000,
okay,
like $25,000 signing bonus. So they did commit a good amount of money to him. He's a very average athlete. He's an effort guy, a 100% effort guy. But he's a really stout run defender. He's like if Jonathan Bullard was 275 pounds and Mormon. That is what Tyler Batty is. But I do think that there's enough of a profile there to potentially make the team, especially because of that effort and motor. Logan Brown, Kansas. He got kicked off of the Wisconsin team for beating up a teammate.
Oh boy.
The official verbiage was that he struck a teammate and then he entered the transfer portal because it was in that 30-day window after Paul Chryst got fired. And Jim Leonard came out and was like, no, I kicked you off the team. You didn't leave. I told you to go. But he's also
when your old coach is throwing dirt on you, that's rough.
Yeah. So we don't know all the details, at least publicly, but the stuff I said was public. I do like Trey Stewart. Hyper productive. He's small, but he ran in that rich rod offense, a lot of zone. He can do the misdirection counter stuff, and he's fast enough. He's got a 4.5 40, and the testing wasn't great, but the on-field vision is really good. He's got enough long speed to be able to turn a double into a triple and potentially a homer, but he's more of like the double kind of hitter, which, you know what, is fine. If you can get me 30 yards, I'll take 30 yards. I'm not going to complain about it just because you can't give me 50. The size is a big concern. If he balls out in special teams, Ty Chandler's gone. That's the way I see it. But the special teams is the one thing that is going to keep Chandler around.
Would it be like as a returner, or it would be like as a gunner or like a kickoff guy?
Well, Chandler, a lot of what he does, like the personal protector kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if Stewart shows any kind of special teams aptitude, I think Chandler's gone and Stewart stays. That's my read on it. The other two guys that I'm really interested in, other than the tight ends, Garber just does not know how to play corner yet. He's only been played football for a few years, but the athletic testing's bonkers. Silas Bolden was a gadget guy at Oregon State. Then he transfers to Texas in a really deep wide receiver room. They did more of the gadgety stuff, the bubble screens, get the ball in his hands. He did have a 75-yard punt return against Arizona State in the college football playoff. He's not overly sudden, but he understands how to use his size to his advantage. So even though he doesn't have the elite athletic profile, he can still maneuver around and be able to make things happen. So Alec Lewis actually had him on the initial 53 that he released early Monday morning. He was not on mine that I released early Monday morning. The only UDFA I had on there was Brosmer, who I thought that they might keep over Brett Rippon. The other one is Dante Fleming, who's a good size, good athlete, also a good returner. So I think that one of the common threads here is they're really prioritizing special teams, which is not a surprise.
Yep.
But that return game, multiple guys who can return, try and figure out who the better ones are, so then you can utilize that this year.
Right. And Alec Lewis's note on Bolden was talking about Rondale Moore, right? And he had Rondale Moore off, basically, and Bolden in, kind of projecting that Bolden would win the punt return job, which Rondale Moore, I think, was pretty obviously brought in to be maybe a little bit of a yards after catch guy as a receiver, but primarily to give that return role because he was so good at it. I don't know if he's done a ton at the NFL, but obviously he was phenomenal at Purdue, right? And the problem with Rondale Moore is he's coming off of a major knee injury, right? I think it was an ACL. I don't remember offhand exactly what it was.
Yeah, he shredded his knee.
Yeah, if it was multiple ligaments, that's really hard to come back from, right? Like if it's a single ACL, it's probably a lot easier, but multiple ligaments is really hard to come back from. So you don't know what you're getting from an athletic perspective from Rondale Moore, which is why it might make sense to project somebody like Bolden in there. So no, really great stuff, Tyler. A couple other UDFAs that I just didn't make it all the way through my list. I just wanted to read them out here just so everybody hears the names. And I just pulled it from Vikings.com. Like they just listed out the guys they signed. It's Joe Huber, an offensive lineman from Wisconsin. Zeke Correll, an offensive lineman from NC State. Michelle, I mean, it's like Michael, but with an S, or Mish, I think was what I saw his nickname as. Powell, safety from Miami. Alex Williams, a defensive tackle from Middle Tennessee State, and Oscar Chapman, who's a punter from Auburn. They're using the International Pathway Program to bring him in. So not really a ton of competition from from him, right? He wasn't a player that was in the beast, which Dane just puts like the top 10 players he thinks are going to get drafted at the position. So probably not somebody that's thought very highly of, although punters are like completely random to me. So I don't think Ryan Wright's going to lose his job, but who knows? Maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting group. It's one of the better UDFA groups in the entire NFL when you look at the consensus board. I like a lot of the names at the top. I still wish they would have got my boy Kobe Bryant from Kansas, but I heard some stuff that wasn't too flattering. And when you run a 4.53 and you're 180 pound, that stuff doesn't fly. But some interesting ones. I like that Joe Huber, Wisconsin O-lineman, Logan Brown, former Wisconsin O-lineman. They're trying to find diamonds in the rough. And if they
maybe they were the two that were beefing and they fight to the death.
You know what? That would be so funny. There's one other name to mention. Miles Price from Indiana was not announced by the Vikings, but was announced by Aaron Wilson.
Sure, the Texans beat writer. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they also, Tommy Hill is coming in for a mini camp, and he might be better than all of these guys. Cornerback out of Nebraska. I wonder if there's something. There's no reason that guy should have been drafted. But yeah, it's a really interesting group that I'm excited to kind of see progress throughout minicamp.
No, absolutely. So a lot of fun stuff. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. I will have, once I get through film study on at least the Vikings draft picks and maybe a couple of the UDFAs, right, the higher priced ones, I will do a more in-depth scouting report just with my own thoughts. But it was fantastic to have you on to have immediate thoughts, right? Because obviously I need to put content out the week after the draft, and there's no way I'm getting through all these players the week after the draft. So it was absolutely incredible to have you on. I need to try to have you back on, at some point, maybe a little bit more often. But this was a lot of fun. Once again, you can find Tyler at The Real Forno on the socials. He writes for AtoZ Sports. He podcasts at Vikings First and Skol, The Real Forno Show. So check him out. You can check myself out, Matt Freese, at Fries Football on BlueSky. Nick Olson, the co-host, at Nick Olson NFL. The podcast is at Kindred Skulls. We are also on BlueSky, right? We're on Twitter and BlueSky. I don't really do anything with the account. I probably should do more than just post the stuff, but whatever. I'm kind of lazy. We're available on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube. It's Kindred Skulls on YouTube. Tyler and I think we broke the record for the best hair on a Vikings podcast. I don't know. Maybe Sal has something to say about that, but I think we did a pretty good job here today.
Well, hold on. Sal has an unfair advantage.
Yeah.
He's a woman.
Right, exactly.
Our hair is spectacular, and we don't have that advantage.
There we go. There we go. No, absolutely. It was super fun. Thanks for coming on the show, Tyler. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And with that, Skol Vikings.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.